Greetings and salutations, everyone. My name is Andrew Kirchhoff, and welcome to my YouTube channel. Today, we're going to be talking about my Week 16 running back starter sits for the 2019 fantasy football season. On today's episode, we're going to be talking about news around the National Football League as it pertains to fantasy football. A lot of players with injuries that we need to be able to prepare for and make sure that our lineups are ready for the championship week, the championship game here in Week 16. Then after that, we're going to be going over the matchups at the running back position as we enter Week 16. Then going over my top 36 running back rankings on the week. Before we begin, let me remind all of you, if you have not yet already, help join the community. Help us get to that 13,000 subscriber mark. I know we're about 200 away. It would mean the world to me if we can get to that point because, goodness, that would be a massive growth of the channel. And that's all I'm trying to do, just grow the channel and try to help you guys win some fantasy championships this year. So don't forget, click the subscribe button, click the bell notification button to stay up to date on my latest content. And if you like today's video, don't forget to click the like button. Thank you very much. Hey guys, how's it going? Hope everyone's doing well. Okay, so let's talk about news around the National Football League before we get into talking about some running backs. A couple pieces of information. The likelihood of players not coming back and going to IR at Week 16 seems to increase, especially for teams that are out of the playoffs. So Matthew Stafford officially is being sent to the injured reserve. Finally, it took a little while. They had to get fined a couple $100,000 to finally figure out they needed to send him to the IR. Evan Ingram of the New York Giants, his season is over. Unfortunate, but he has been a injury-prone tight end since coming in the league. He has never played a full season, and it's not a surprise that he's missed this many games, but it's unfortunate because he is a great talent. So hopefully his future is bright, but obviously the injuries have been something of a concerning factor. Other than that, Will Grier will probably be named the starting quarterback of the Carolina Panthers. I don't really know how much that is going to affect the Carolina Panthers receiving core. DJ Moore, Curtis Samuel, Christian McCaffrey. I think they're still going to be a consistent group because, to be honest, anything will be better than Kyle Allen as it currently stands. Kyle Allen's throwing too many interceptions and not really giving his offense a chance. Sure, they're coming back in games and having a lot of garbage time plays, and which is kind of helping the receiving core and running back of that offense. But still, I think Will Grier will probably have a good opportunity this coming week against the Indianapolis Colts defense. Is giving up a lot of points to wide receivers and quarterbacks, and then obviously Christian McCaffrey's balling out every game, so it'll be perfectly fine with him. Outside of that, the Pittsburgh Steelers are going to stay with Duck Hodges. Mike Tomlin took a couple days to think about it, but he is good to go with him going into this week against the New York Jets, so that should be something interesting to see. Outside of that, Drew Brees Monday night had an insane game. Other players in terms of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers down in the NFC South. When we talk about the Saints, we talk about a team like Tampa Bay Buccaneers on a 4-game winning streak. Their wide receiver core is absolutely demolished. As it currently stands, Mike Evans will probably be out for the rest of the season. So will Chris Godwin and IR. They just IR'd Scotty Miller. So 3 of their wide receivers are gone. What is left is Justin Watson and Brashad Perriman. Like we talked about in terms of waiver wires, those are guys that I'm potentially trying to go after this week because they play against the Houston Texans, and that offense has been on fire. They've been scoring 30-plus points every single week for the last 4 weeks, and I don't know if they're slowing down. They'll be in Tampa Bay, and it's a pretty promising pickup and play potentially this week. Outside of that, really not too much other news in terms of this Tuesday. Sure, it's December 17th, but it's pretty quiet around the league right now in terms of any sort of injuries, any sort of players that are getting signed. Nothing like that. Just pretty quiet. All quiet on the Western Front. But anyway, let's go ahead and move on. Let's talk about some running backs going into the matchups for Week 16 of the 2019 fantasy football season. Here we go. Who gives up the most points to opposing running backs on a weekly basis in half PPR? Well, it's nobody other than the Carolina Panthers. And last week when I came up here and I had Carson as my number 2 running back, and I said he'd go for 150 and 2, I'm not surprised that he did it, right? And I shouldn't be, praised for knowing that was going to happen because everyone balls out against this defense. So I expect Marlon Mack to potentially have a better week here. Unfortunately, he got vultured last night by Jordan Wilkins. It happens. Obviously, playing against the Saints, trying to run the ball against the Saints, not a fun task at hand. But again, I think the Indianapolis Colts will have a better, game this coming week against Carolina Panthers. Moving on, they had Jacksonville Jaguars, as we all know. What was interesting is that Josh Jacobs, he played. And he played a lot. He had 24 rushing attempts in that game against Jacksonville. And to be honest, he didn't look that good. I'm not sure if he's just running slow because he's a little concerned about his shoulder. But to be honest, everyone was killing that defense in terms of running the ball. And the Raiders pretty much just gashed him with Darren Waller. Even though Josh Jacobs had a pretty decent performance, and giving the ball to him 24 times gives me the excitement and or the promise that he's going to play this week against the Chargers, I still expected more. Now, who's playing the Jacksonville Jaguars this week? Devonta Freeman. Devonta Freeman typically does not have good weeks, but when he's given great opportunities as such as this, he's going to take advantage of it, and I expect him to have a pretty good week against the Jaguars. Moving on, the Miami Dolphins, a guy that has been maybe the best running back in the last 6 weeks, outside of like a Zeke or a McCaffrey. It truly has been, or Derrick Henry. We're not going to forget Derrick Henry. He has definitely been up there. Nick Chubb's up there. But a guy that a lot of people are not, remembering is that Joe Mixon has had a tear for the last 7 weeks. He's incredible. Going against New England, running the ball 25 times for $137. That is unbelievable. That is insane production. Got a lot of work in the passing game, which was promising. Gets to take on the Miami Dolphins this week. That is a recipe for success for a guy that is playing out of his mind in an offense that has looked far better in the last couple of weeks in comparison to when they had the rookie Finley under center. So we'll see where Joe Mixon lies this week. Anyway, moving on to the Kansas City Chiefs. Chiefs, you know what? Every time they play against the Broncos, the running backs of the Broncos can't get it done. And you know what? I don't really know. Like, I'm thinking to myself, are the Kansas City Chiefs really that bad at stopping the run? They end up on this top 5, 6 list every single week, but it has been a long time since they have been destroyed. When I mean destroyed is like, when we go back and we look at what Derrick Henry did to them in week 10, like 32 fantasy points, 2 rushing touchdowns, on 23 carries, 188 yards. Like, we haven't seen much of that as of late. Sure, Josh Jacobs went for 100 on them in week 13, but in week 14, James White, Brandon Bolden didn't do much. The week after that, Royce Freeman, Phillip Lindsay haven't done much. There are games in which this team will play significantly better against running backs, but this week, Tarik Cohen, David Montgomery, not sure if they'll be able to get it done. It's just a little sketchy. Moving on to Detroit Lions. They will take on Phillip Lindsay, Royce Freeman, speaking of the two of them. I don't really trust either of them. We'll talk about it in a little bit, but, Royce Freeman, never going to be in a roster of mine for as long as I live in 2019. And as long as Phillip Lindsay's, playing as average as he has, I'm not really trusting him as of right now. Then we go ahead and move on. We'll find ourselves a Cincinnati Bengals matchup that really, it pretty much opens up the possibility of Patrick Laird and Myles Gaskin to potentially have a good week here. We'll see. We'll talk about them. Both of them are on the list today. So you get a little bit of perspective on how I think about both these guys. Then we have the Washington Redskins, who have been absolutely dominated in the last couple weeks on the ground. Now, Saquon Barkley had his best game of the season and has finally become Saquon Barkley last week, and hopefully that boost of confidence that he is going to gain from that Miami matchup in which he absolutely ran all over them, that's going to hopefully carry on to Washington this week, because the Washington Redskins have been dominated on the ground. In the last 2 weeks, Aaron Jones went for 134 and 1 touchdown, 6 catches for 58. This past week, Miles Sanders, 122, 1 touchdown, 6 catches for 50, and another receiving touchdown. Let's be honest. The running back position has been gashing. Absolutely gashing this Washington Redskins defense. And I don't think it's going to stop, because he's on a mission. He's going to close the season strong. And if you've gotten to the fantasy championship with Saquon Barkley, that's a testament to how you have built your team and how you have, with absolute resilience, made it to the finals. It is an extremely tough task to have gone picking him number 1 overall or wherever you did, to getting to the fantasy championship, considering his production and output this year has been far less significant than what it was last year. He was a legendary running back last season in his rookie year, and now we've seen much less. It's just hard to imagine how you can fall from that greatness. I don't know. But either way, Saquon's getting back to it. So hopefully this week he's in a feast. Moving on to Green Bay Packers. Green Bay Packers will be subject to probably Dalvin Cook. I expect Dalvin Cook to play. I don't really expect anybody else. Sure, they're going to be talking about Mike Boone and Alexander Madison all week long, but from what I heard yesterday, Mike Zimmer in a press conference, quote unquote, said, Dalvin Cook feels good. The shoulder's fine. We only shut him down pretty much. And he didn't say it explicitly, but he kind of, I guess it was there was undertones of the fact that maybe perhaps they shut him down because they were already winning significantly and they knew they were going to win that game regardless of who was at running back. So I kind of felt like that was the case in his press conference. So hopefully that's the case. Hopefully he plays on Monday night. But sure, you guys want to go out and pick up his handcuff regardless. Moving on. Houston Texans. I don't really trust Ronald Jones. We're going to move on with that because we know that they're all going to pass the ball in Tampa Bay. And then we have the Arizona Cardinals matchup, which, man, Chris Carson looked really good this season, and it's not really much of a surprise considering he's just back-to-back Pro Bowl kind of esque seasons. And then we have a couple other decent matchups, the Chargers and the Raiders playing one another. We'll see how that turns out. And then obviously we have some of the tougher matchups on hand. New England Patriots, even though Joe Mixon ran all over them, they'll take on Singletary. I think Singletary will be good regardless because he's good no matter who he plays against. I don't know. It's pretty crazy how good Singletary's been. Moving on to San Francisco 49ers, they are always good against the run. So are the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So are the Saints. The Steelers have been good in the past. But again, at times, I mean, it's going to be an interesting matchup. Le'Veon Bell versus the Pittsburgh defense. I mean, Le'Veon Bell is out to make a point, and so is the Pittsburgh team. So we'll see exactly how this is going to turn out. But again, that should be an exciting matchup on hand. All right, let's go ahead and move on. Let's talk about my top 36 running back rankings. We talked about matchups long enough, and I know many of you are probably sick of hearing me talk about matchups, but hey, we're getting to week 16. This is the final week for many of you. Next week, we will be talking about some fantasy football advice for week 17 for those of you who are in those contests. But regardless, let's start it off with my top 12 running back rankings, starting off with Mr. Christian McCaffrey as my number one. Shouldn't be much of a surprise. Mr. Christian McCaffrey has 104 more points than Dalvin Cook, who is the number 2 running back this season. Christian McCaffrey is absolutely insane, and if he ends up breaking 1,000 rushing yards and receiving yards this season, I will not be surprised. He is only, and I quote, he is only 186 yards away from breaking, or 186 receiving yards away from breaking the 1,000 mark. So that would be absolutely insane, but is a very, he's very capable of that kind of explosion, especially if a guy like Will Grier is going to check it down to him very often and let him get a lot of yards after the catch. So that would be incredible. But regardless, we all know Christian McCaffrey is the number one every single week. He'll continue to be. This last week, finally got some touchdowns on the ground, which he was missing the 2 weeks prior. But again, he has been as consistent as ever. He's going to have a good week against the Indianapolis Colts in your fantasy championship. Moving on. Number 2 is Saquon Barkley. Like I mentioned before, just about a couple minutes ago, Saquon Barkley finally had his resurgence. 24 rushing attempts, the most he's had all season long. And then he followed that with 112 rushing yards on the ground, 2 rushing touchdowns. Quite an impressive output, in my opinion. Got a lot of work in the passing game, which was very exciting to see. And hopefully that is going to continue and sustain this coming week against the Washington Redskins. I expect him to feast. Saquon, like last week in an interview, said, I don't feel right. I feel like I'm not running full speed and I'm trying to protect myself. Last week, regardless of what he said, he finally got back to where we expect him to be, and hopefully he'll continue. So as of right now, Saquon, he's my number 2. Moving on to number 3, Ezekiel Elliott. There hasn't been another running back as of right now in the last couple weeks that has been more consistent as Ezekiel Elliott. I mean, the guy is scoring touchdowns, something that he was missing out on last year. If you guys don't remember, last season, Ezekiel Elliott only had a total of 6 touchdowns. Imagine that, only 6. This year has already doubled it, has 12 total touchdowns, 11 through on the ground, 1 through the air. That is absolutely what we wanted to see. Sure, his rushing or his receiving total has not been as glorified as it was last year, but again, the rushing touchdown, the receiving touchdowns, those are going to make up for those points that you have potentially lost in the passing game. But as of late, he has been great on the ground. He gets to take on the Philadelphia Eagles, and typically the Philadelphia Eagles matchup isn't a good one. But after what I saw, Adrian Peterson do, and what I've seen Ezekiel Elliott do against this front, earlier this season, Ezekiel Elliott ran for 111 yards and a touchdown on this defense. In the last couple of weeks, has had 2 rushing touchdowns. Each of the last 2 weeks has been just been imposing his will on the ground and really been the hammer for this offense. And especially with Dak dealing with that fractured hand, that's going to be something to look into and maybe keep our eye out on. It's a little concerning, but they have Zeke to rely upon for a reason, and I hope they're going to do that this week. He's my number 3. Moving on to number 4, we have Chris Carson. We talked about Carson a lot. They play against the Cardinals. We saw Nick Chubb last week absolutely dominate this defense. I mean, ran through them for 127-1. Chris Carson is on fire. He is one of the best running backs in the National Football League. And this week, he's not going to slow down. He's going to continue on pace with what he has done all season long. He's going to run through the Arizona Cardinals at home. I expect him to have a very good week. Sure, they're moving CJ Prosise into the game, trying to get Chris Carson some much needed rest at times. But I'm not worried about that. It's not like it's Rashad Penny coming in and stealing touchdowns. This is Chris Carson's backfield for the rest of the season, and especially this week in your fantasy championship. He's in my lineup. He's my number 4. Moving on to Dalvin Cook. I expect Dalvin Cook to play again. Sure, he's considered questionable as of right now, but I'll go ahead and read you the quote that I was referring to earlier. So it says, Coach Mike Zimmer said, yeah, it feels good today. When asked whether Dalvin Cook's shoulder should play through the injury, blah, 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 Zimmer added, I think there wasn't an issue with him. There were probably a couple of times that we could have given the ball to him more. It sounds like Cook is good to go for the Vikings in Week 16, blah, blah, blah. Alexander Madison dealing with an ankle injury regardless. Okay, so that being said, that's a promising quote. That is something that I like to hear. And to be honest, against the Packers, they're only one game behind the Packers. If they can win this game, the Minnesota Vikings could potentially win their division and clinch a bye week for the playoffs. So we'll see how that's going to go. This is a game that Dalvin Cook is ready for and I think has been preparing for. And that's why they've shut him down in those other games against the Seahawks or potentially against the Chargers last week, because they know they need him for now. And I'm hoping he's going to be an amazing running back as he's been all season. I know he's been slowing down as of late because of these injuries kind of bugging him a little bit. But I think he's going to dominate through it against the defense that really can't stop the run at times. He'll be good. He's my number 5. Moving on to number 6, Joe Mixon. We talked about him earlier. Joe Mixon has been one of the better backs as of late. And if you have suffered through the entire first 8 games of the season, first 7 games, of the season, I mean, Joe Mixon has put up performance. I mean, it's insane. Like the first 7 games of the season, he posted, and I quote, 5 different single-digit scoring games, less than 10 points, 5 out of the 7 games. That's insanely bad. But as of late, since week 8, has posted only 1. Since week 8, it's week 16 now. So, I mean, let's be honest. Joe Mixon has turned it around, and he's going to be fantastic against Miami. I expect him to run the ball heavily on them, and this to be an exciting game for Mixon. He's my number 6. Moving on to Nick Chubb, my number 7. The guy that leads the league in rushing yards as of right now, a guy that really can't be stopped on the ground. Regardless of what you put in front of him, this guy is going to run for 100 yards. He has been absolutely fantastic. Now, sometimes he won't get that rushing touchdown, and that will hurt, but we have seen Nick Chubb dominate this Baltimore defense before. If we go back and we look at what he did earlier this season, 165 yards on 20 carries, 3 rushing touchdowns. We know where this team wants to feed the ball. They want to give it to Nick Chubb. They want to dictate their offense that way. And then they'll spread it out accordingly. But Nick Chubb is the entire key to this offense. It's finally taken Freddie Kitchens God knows how many weeks to figure this out. But luckily, they figured it out later, better late than never. How about that? But either way, I expect them to be good against Baltimore at home this week. Nick Chubb is my number 7 running back. Moving on, Derrick Henry. Now, the only concerns I have with Derrick Henry are the New Orleans matchup, number 1, first and foremost, and his injury. Now, his injury isn't significant enough to hold him out of the game, but we have to remember, he did not practice a single time last week and play during the game. 21 rushing attempts, perfectly fine, only 86 rushing yards, had a couple goal line carries, was stuffed on the goal line. The Houston Texans, I got to give them props. They played very well against a guy like Derrick Henry. They really bottled him up as best as they possibly could, and that's what ended up winning them that game. Being able to pretty much contain the best player on the other team's offense is all you have to do if you're trying to win games. And that's what they did. They stopped Derrick Henry. They stopped them from imposing their will on the ground. And it forced Tannehill to make some mistakes, throw an interception in the red zone that was returned almost the entire length of the field. This is some important things here and there. But either way, I 100% believe if Derrick Henry is on your team, he needs to be in your lineup this week. He's starting in my lineups. I'm making sure he's there because regardless of this injury, he's capable of dominating against any team. It does not matter. But again, we have to remember this is a tough matchup. New Orleans is very good at home and especially against stopping the run. So he's my number 8. Moving on, we have number 9, Mark Ingram. Mark Ingram's been insane. Why? Because Mark Ingram scores touchdowns. More than just about any other quarterback, Mark Ingram has 14 total touchdowns this season. I mean, he's only just behind, okay? And I quote, Aaron Jones, Derrick Henry, and Christian McCaffrey. Those are the only other running backs that have more touchdowns than Mark Ingram this season, which is extremely impressive. So as of right now, with the offense, with how good they have been as an entire whole, they play against Cleveland. We saw Kenyan Drake dominate against them. The running game is going to feast. We saw even Kyler Murray run the ball effectively against that defense in not even designed run, just scrambling. I expect a team like the Cleveland Browns to probably be subject to a beatdown probably this week, and I expect Mark Ingram to help that go in the right direction. He's my number 9 running back. Moving on, we have Josh Jacobs, one of the best. You know what's insane? We're going, and I saw a thing the other day. It was like Derrick Henry, Mark Henry, the world's strongest man. Derrick Henry and Mark Ingram and Josh Jacobs and Kenyan Drake, 4 Alabama running backs, all playing really well this season, to be honest. I know Kenyan Drake has been a little iffy, but we haven't seen this many good Alabama running backs in the National Football League in quite some time. I just wanted to point that out because typically a lot of people kind of correlate Alabama running backs and not being able to transition to the NFL. And that's been unfortunate, but as of right now, it's looking good so far. Okay, let's go to, we even saw Bo Scarborough get some reps this year, right? Another Alabama running back. Hopefully these guys continue to get more reps as the seasons go on. Moving on. I was mentioning Josh Jacobs for a reason, talking about Alabama running backs. This is a guy that, yes, is got a fractured shoulder, but he's going to play through it. And I expect him to play through it this coming week against the Los Angeles Chargers. If, in fact, he does so, he is my number 10 running back on the week. I expected him to do more against the Jacksonville Jaguars. But again, anything he could put up, I will take. 10-plus points, perfect. I'm perfectly fine with that. I'm happy with that. And I'm going to continue to play a guy like Josh Jacobs because I know what he's capable of, and I know that he's going to be able to get the job done. Last time they played against the Los Angeles Chargers, obviously Phillip Rivers did some favors by turning over the ball, but this is a guy that on 16 carries had 71 rushing yards and a rushing touchdown against his defense. Again, this defense has not been able to stop the run at times this season, and I expect Josh Jacobs to be good. Moving on, number 11, Aaron Jones, a guy that is pretty much feasted just off of his 17 touchdowns. 17 total touchdowns. That's what this guy has done this season. It is absolutely insane because on average, he rushes the ball maybe 13 times a game and catches the ball maybe 3.5 times. So maybe 16, 17 touches a game, but has had 17 touchdowns this season. That's absolutely insane. Against Minnesota, it's not an easy matchup. But again, we have to remember it does not matter with guys like Aaron Jones when he's given so much red zone opportunity, so much opportunity in terms of scoring touchdowns. It'll only take one touchdown and your entire, points just completely flipped. You start off with, 7 points, boom, you got 13. You get another one, it's over, 19 points. That's what he did pretty much this last week. Even though he wasn't incredible against the Bears on the ground, the touchdowns really carried him, and I expect him to get carried by those once again. Moving on, we have Myles Sanders as my number 12 running back, closing out my RB1s. Again, Myles Sanders had an incredible game. And to be honest, my only concern with Myles Sanders last week was what are they going to do with the backfield? And to be honest, even with both of them being used at a pretty substantial amount, Myles Sanders took his opportunity and ran it into the end zone multiple times. He absolutely feasted. Now, against the Dallas Cowboys this week, will he be able to dominate and or do similar numbers? I really do think that the Dallas front seven is not that good against stopping the run. We have seen them be battered multiple times. Now you may be thinking, sure, Todd Gurley ran for 21 yards, but that's a Rams problem. That is not a problem with every single team. When we go back and we look at what the Dallas Cowboys have given up on the ground this season, let's go ahead and take a peek here. Yes, they give up technically the 19 most points to opposing running backs, but Todd Gurley still scored touchdowns last week. But in terms of what they've given up to yards to opposing running backs, Sony Michel went for 85. Devin Singletary went over 100. Dalvin Cook went over 170. Bo Scarborough went for 55 and 1. Saquon Barkley nearly went over 100 total yards. Aaron Jones earlier this season, we know what he's done. Alvin Kamara didn't have a great game, but still almost broke over 100 in that game. There are contests here that can honestly, in my opinion, potentially end up being a Myles Sanders week, or kind of nudge me towards playing Myles Sanders over the next guys that we're going to talk about, because the hot hand is something that I really like to play, and especially into a matchup in which everything's on the line. It's at home in Philadelphia. And Sanders has just been far too good, especially in the passing game. That passing work is just something I don't want to pass up. You get it? Moving on. let's go ahead and talk about my RB2s on the week. Starting off with number 13, Raheem Mostert. Now, the Los Angeles Rams, if you guys don't, maybe perhaps you turned off the game against the Cowboys this week, but the Los Angeles Rams got ran all over. I mean, the Cowboys ran for over 200 and something yards. I mean, both of their running backs, Zeke and Tony Pollard, went for over 100 and a touchdown. So if that says enough, I understand Raheem Mostert wasn't as significant or as advertised. I mean, I was all on the Raheem Mostert train last week. And for good reason, dude. He's been a good running back. But we saw a little bit too much of Tevin Coleman, which kind of hurt us. But again, he did score a touchdown. 4 games in a row with a touchdown. That is impressive. And I expect him to be good this week at home against the Rams, a defense that has been struggling as of late. And a team like the 49ers coming off of a pretty upsetting loss to the Falcons. They're going to get back on track this week. Raheem Mostert is going to be good. My number 13. Moving on to number 14, Devin Singletary. Like I've mentioned almost every single week, as of late, Devin Singletary has kind of hit a quota in terms of rushing yards. In the last couple weeks, 95, 75, 106, 63, 89, 87. He is always producing on the ground, getting at least 15 plus touches on the ground every single week. That is a great number that we want to see. Playing against New England this week, hopefully they can tap into what exactly a guy like Joe Mixon was capable of doing and feed Devin Singletary enough to where you don't have to leave the ball in Josh Allen's hands and force him to make turnovers because he's trying to make plays. Devin Singletary is going to be an essential part. Last time they played against the New England Patriots, there was no Devin Singletary. There was only Frank Gore. And if I'm not mistaken, Frank Gore went for over 100 rushing yards against them. Let me go ahead and check this out. Here we go. Frank Gore, earlier this season against New England, ran for, and I quote, 109 yards on 17 carries. I expect Devin Singletary to be great this week. Could be even better. Again, ranking subject to change. Moving on, number 15 is Marlon Mack, playing against the easiest matchup at the running back position. They play against the Carolina Panthers, and as of right now, just of what I watched Jacoby Brissett produce yesterday, he is shaky. He almost looks nervous when he's playing. And he's not delivering the ball accurately and or effectively throughout a game. And I really do believe it's because he's not that good of a quarterback. And on top of it, he needs a running game. He needs to be able to tap into play action in order to be able to at least find some open receivers out there. I know he got T.Y. Hilton back, and he has Jack Doyle, he has Pascal. But again, we really need to establish the run, and they're going to be able to do that this week with Marlon Mack. I think they'll get back to running the ball effectively against the Carolina Panthers. Again, this last week's matchup wasn't great. Saints, they're going to hold running backs, but I expect Marlon Mack to be good this week. He's my number 15 running back on the week. Moving on to another monster running back. We have number 16, Adrian Peterson, who takes on the New York Giants. Adrian Peterson has been incredible. I mean, I mentioned it yesterday when talking about a running back that you need to potentially pick up if he's available. I doubt it. There's no way that a guy like Adrian Peterson could be available in your league. But if he is, and you are thinking, hey, you know what? Maybe I want to start him over Todd Gurley, because Todd Gurley has the 49ers matchup. Todd Gurley did not look great outside of his touchdowns last week. What do? Adrian Peterson has been deceptively, ridiculously good. I'll mention it again, just like how I kind of talked about it yesterday. Scored a touchdown each of the last 3 weeks. His rushing attempts in the last 4 weeks, 10, 13, 20, 16. 2 of those being majority with Darius Geis. And on top of it, his rushing totals, 99, 76, 66 in the last 3 weeks, despite having to play against Philadelphia. Had a great game last week. The New York Giants are a defense that I want to run against, and I really do think that a guy like Adrian Peterson will be able to play well against them. Sure, the New York Giants kind of sit middle of the pack in terms of giving up points to opposing running backs, but that being said, I do believe that there is a good possibility that we have a good performance out of a guy like Adrian Peterson. All right, moving on. Let's talk about my number 17 back. Another one of these guys that you're wondering, Andrew, are we really going to play Devonta Freeman? Absolutely. I think if Devonta Freeman is on your roster, he needs to play. He is a back that, sure, is not that good and has kind of washed up in the last couple weeks, but they're going to give him touches. He's going to touch the ball nearly 17 plus times a game. He's going to. That's a given at this point. And when you play against the Jacksonville Jaguars, a team that really can't stop the run, they're going to key in on that. And they're going to be able to dominate that because really they don't have too many weapons. Austin Hooper's been struggling on his return. Obviously, this is the first time we saw Julio come back to life in the last couple weeks. This past week, obviously, 20 targets makes a huge difference. But again, Devonta Freeman is going to have to help take a little bit of the pressure off of the quarterback. as this team will probably end up winning this game handily and maybe even potentially running out the clock. Devonta Freeman should be a good running back this week. Maybe even Brian Hill in garbage time, similar to what they did against the Carolina Panthers in Week 14, where both of them ran for a touchdown and a good amount of yards and a good yard per carry average. I think he'll be great. He's my number 17. Moving on. Number 18, we have Kenyan Drake. A lot of people did not anticipate a Kenyan Drake 4-touchdown game. I am one of them. Because when you go ahead and you ran the ball for, no joke, in the last 3 games, right? Weeks 11, 13, and 14, he ran for, 135 yards. This past week, he ran for 137 in 1 week on 22 carries. That is insane. Obviously it had to do with the matchup. Playing against San Francisco, the Rams, Pittsburgh, those aren't easy matchups, and they're not going to be easy. But exploding for 137 and 4, when you drop 4 touchdowns, you look like Derrick Henry of last year. Do you guys remember Derrick Henry when he had that week against the Jaguars and pretty much locked down people's first round of the playoff wins? This is something similar to that. But this is in the second round. And Kenyan Drake, my goodness, that is an exciting prospect because, to be honest, I think they're going to run him until they can't anymore. As it currently stands, they play against Seattle. In my opinion, not too difficult of a matchup. They're probably middle of the pack, but this team is going to be able to spread them out, and I expect him to potentially have a good week here. When we talk about when they played against Seattle early in this season, a guy like David Johnson was able to produce against this defense. Let me go ahead and pull this up for reference. David Johnson earlier this season got a majority of his work in the passing game. In fact, obviously the 11 touches for 40 yards on the ground, not an incredible stat performance, but in terms of his work in the passing game, that's exactly where the running backs for the Arizona Cardinals will always feast and always find their value. He had 8 catches for 99 yards on 11 targets. Hopefully they can get a guy like Kenyan Drake out there catching the passes or out in the flat. But either way, I expect Kenyan Drake to hopefully continue his momentum. He's my number 18. Moving on to 19, Alvin Kamara. The thing that scares me about Alvin Kamara is that once again, he has not put up another great week. He has not surpassed 100 total yards, and he has not scored a touchdown since week 3. Therefore, Alvin Kamara will sit here at number 19 because I really do think there are better options than him. And I really do think playing the hot hand potentially is the way to go. Sure, you want to play your studs, especially in a fantasy championship game. But Alvin Kamara, by all means, has not been as advertised. He has been extremely... when they came out, the Saints came out on their offense last night. Who was taking the first reps at the running back position? Latavius Murray. In fact, so that scares me. Not to an extent to where I'm not playing him no matter what. He's an RB2 in my mind. If he scores a touchdown, he can get into that RB1 conversation. But again, the likelihood of him doing so, the odds are stacked against him. That's all I can say this season. This is a guy that is only, and in fact, had 1 total touchdown on the ground and 1 total touchdown through the air all season long. 2 total touchdowns. Even a guy like Leonard Fournette has more touchdowns, and Leonard Fournette has 3. And we know Leonard Fournette's not getting the ball in the red zone because his offense is not capable of it. But regardless, we're going to go ahead and move on. And we're going to talk about my number 20 running back, James White, a guy that has produced consistently in the last couple weeks, in fact. Catching a pass, going to the end zone, not a surprise. That is a thing that James White is capable of and will always be capable of. And I think this coming week against the Buffalo Bills, they're going to continue to key in on that because, James White, again, he is a receiving back. He's not someone that's going to run between the tackles. And yes, he has done it in the past and he's been successful at it. But they want to use Sony Michel as their downhill running back. That's what they did last week. 19 carries for 89 rushing yards. Rex Burkhead, 6 for 53. That's what they want. They want to run the ball. But James White, leading the team in receptions and receiving yards last week, 3 for 49. Wasn't a lot, but it got the job done. Had his receiving touchdown. Had, obviously, 4 targets. That's not great, but I expect them to have to use him more against the Buffalo Bills this week because they're going to be tested by that defense, certainly. So I expect James White to get a lot done in his job as of right now. As a PPR back. Moving on, we have number 21, Leonard Fournette. Here's my concern. Since they benched Nick Foles, we've seen a little bit less of a presence in the passing game, and that's a little concerning for me, considering, this last 2 weeks, Leonard Fournette has not put up a game more. He hasn't put up more than 51 rushing yards, and he hasn't put up more than, 9.8 half-point PPR fantasy points. That's concerning. And I really do think that, Atlanta, sure, they are technically a good matchup, but Leonard Fournette scares me, to be honest. If you can stop the 49ers running game and running attack, and you can play up to them, I'm certain that you can go ahead and dominate an offense like the Jaguars, who have been struggling heavily in their quarterback play. Leonard Fournette is an RB2 at right now, but again, we're just going to have to wait and see. I'm just not too hot on him this week. Moving on, we have number 22, Le'Veon Bell. Okay, so here's the thing about Le'Veon Bell. We all know that Le'Veon Bell wants the ball. We all know this. My concern is that Adam Gase is going to use Le'Veon Bell as a distraction for this entire game, because everyone, both sides of the ball, is hyper-focused on what Le'Veon Bell is going to do. Adam Gase knows that Le'Veon Bell wants the ball, and that he wants to run the ball maybe 30 times this coming week. And the Pittsburgh defense knows that Le'Veon Bell wants the ball, and that they have to pretty much prepare to stop the run or cover him out of the backfield. What I'm worried about is that the Jets are going to use him as a distraction, move him all over the field, and then just feed Jamison Crowder and Robbie Anderson and have Sam Darnold go off in the passing game. That's what I'm expecting to happen potentially. That's why I have Le'Veon Bell a little bit undervalued, because he's not going to get as many touches as we expect. Sure, he'll get his average amount of touches, but he's not going to be out of control. Last week he had 21 on the ground for 87 rushing yards against the Ravens. That is a great performance. That is something, especially in Baltimore, that is good. But again, we'll see how this week works. Again, he's an RB2 in my mind, but the number 22 running back at this time. Moving on, we have number 23, Austin Ekeler. Austin Ekeler could potentially be a higher running back on today's list, to be honest. He could potentially be in the top 19 conversation, probably maybe even above Alvin Kamara, because every single week this dude's putting up 10-plus points. Even on his worst possible week, he'll put up 10 points. So against Oakland, probably will be able to get the job done. But again, it just depends. He's not going to get more than 10 touches on the ground. Even with those couple games that, sure, he had 101 rushing yards on 8 touches against Jaguars, or those games where he has almost 100 receiving yards on 8 catches. Hopefully that's the case. But again, we've seen Mike Williams be more of a contributor in this offense. Keenan Allen's been dominating. Maybe Melvin Gordon's going to get a bunch of touches because he needs to redeem himself from last week's 2 fumbles. We'll see how this goes. But Austin Ekeler's still a pretty good RB2 this coming week. Moving on, my last RB2 on the week, my number 24, James Conner. James Conner, limited in touches, and didn't produce much outside of the touchdown. That's what's concerning, right? Sure, he had his receiving touchdown, but 8 for 42 on the ground. 5 yards per carry. That's not bad. Not bad at all, especially against Buffalo. But against the New York Jets, it's going to be a lot harder, in my opinion, as they'll probably kind of key in on stopping the run, because Devlin Hodges, if I'm the Jets, I want him to throw the ball. So stack the box, force him to pass, and pretty much just kind of stop a guy like James Conner, which at times has not been difficult in the past. So potentially that's what we could see. Moving on. Okay, let's go ahead and get into the last group of running backs that I wanted to talk about today. Starting off with my number 25, Melvin Gordon, a guy that absolutely disappeared last week because he fumbled twice. And what happens when you fumble twice in the National Football League? Well, you get your ass benched. And that is exactly what he deserved. He deserved to be benched last week. Despite having a pretty decent game against that front seven, he could not hold on to the ball, and that is something of a concern. Now, this week, he plays against the Oakland Raiders. The last time he played against them, 22 for 108 and a touchdown. That is a good line. Now, can he go ahead and play that exact way? I'm not sure, because I don't know how much opportunity he's going to get. Typically, when running backs fumble and they perform as bad, they will get replaced. But, Phillip Rivers showing up, throwing 4 interceptions, not getting his ass benched, kind of leads me to believe that Melvin Gordon is probably going to play and probably be better than a number 25 back. He is number 25 on his jersey. I kind of like this number 25 spot, but again, he's kind of he's a flex play. An RB2, potentially, but as of right now, we'll just leave Melvin Gordon at number 25. Moving on. Number 26, we have Kareem Hunt. So as of right now, what Kareem Hunt kind of sits, he's a flex play for certain. He's a 10-point per guy every single week and has somehow managed to get his way. And I joke not. He's actually somehow managed to be an every week start, which is insane considering he's not always scoring touchdowns and he's not really given too much opportunity. But when he does get the opportunity, he delivers. He will get the yardage. He will get the passing work in a PPR, half PPR format. He's been consistent this season. Playing against Baltimore kind of leads me to believe that they're going to have to pass a little bit more, get more involvement of Kareem Hunt out of the backfield as a check down for Baker Mayfield. And as of right now, Kareem Hunt, not another bad play, to be honest, at 26. Moving on. Phillip Lindsay is my number 27 because, again, Has a great matchup against the Detroit Lions, a defense that gives up some of the most points to opposing running backs in half PPR scoring formats. As it currently stands, Phillip Lindsay is not a good running back. He is not given enough opportunity to be able to feast like he did last season. This is a guy that, sure, at times has looked pretty good. But again, when you're only given 7 rushing attempts for 32 yards in a snow game in Kansas City last week, that's something that I don't really want to have to deal with. And that's pretty disheartening for me as a Phillip Lindsay owner. So I'll just leave him at 27. Moving on to 28, Todd Gurley. I'm just preparing all of you for the potential ass whooping that the Rams are going to take, to be honest. The 49ers are a team that certainly know how to stop the Rams. They showed that and they proved that in LA months ago. And this coming week, they're coming off of a win or the loss that's probably got them pretty pissed off because, to be honest, all the Rams want to do now is play upset special. And that's what every team wants to do now against the 49ers. And they're going to be tested as such. But the problem I have is that they're not going to be able to run the ball in the 49ers. It is not an easy task. They are one of the best for a reason. And if Gurley's ever going to produce, it's going to have to be similar to how he did last week. Scoring touchdowns either on the 1 yard line or catching a pass barely on the 1 yard. Like, he's going to have to get work like that. And to be honest, I think the 49ers defense is just far too elite at this moment in time to just let Gurley do whatever he wants. Moving on, we have Carlos Hyde at number 29, a guy that broke over 1,000 rushing yards this season. An unlikely player to do so, but he has done so. 1,000 rushing yards and 5 rushing touchdowns on the season so far. Broke for over 100 against the Tennessee Titans. Now, when we think about really quickly, I'm curious. Because Alvin Kamara gets to take on the Tennessee Titans. And it's not a bad matchup because if we look at what the Tennessee Titans have given up in the last couple of weeks, Carlos Hyde went for 104-1. DeAndre Washington 53-1. Jordan Wilkins the week before 47-0. Okay, but Nyheim Hines had 1. Leonard Fournette 97-2. Damian Williams went for 77. McCaffrey went for 146-2. There is a very good possibility Alvin Kamara could go off. But anyway, Carlos Hyde went off against them. This week gets to take on Tampa Bay. I'm pretty concerned about that. That is not a fun matchup at hand. But again, if he ends up stealing a touchdown because his team gets down to the red zone, I'm not going to be surprised. He could find his value there. Moving on, we have David Montgomery, a guy that has been an absolute disappointment this season and does not continue to surprise. He keeps putting up single-digit performances, and that's why he will sit at this number 30 slot because, sure, he has the potential of a touchdown, but until then, he is a RB3 at best, a guy that I don't really want to play. Moving on to 31, Ronald Jones. When we're talking about disappointments, we can 100% mention Ronald Jones because he's exactly that. He's a disappointment this season. Despite how much he's been given the ball and how many opportunities he has had, he's not producing with his opportunities, and so be it. Him and Peyton Barber will just sit in that backfield and waste time. Moving on, 32, Tevin Coleman. Despite how good Raheem Mostert has been and how many yards per attempt that Raheem Mostert has averaged, and his efficiency, Tevin Coleman still manages to find his way into the lineup. Perhaps was used at a surplus last week because of the fact that it was a revenge matchup against the Falcons. Shanahan, Tevin Coleman, maybe they wanted to do something there, but just wasn't really effective. He'll sit at 32 because Breida fumbled last week, hasn't looked good, and Tevin Coleman's probably the only other guy. I mean, in terms of snap percentage, everything, getting the most snap attempts after a guy like Mostert at this moment. Moving on to Tarik Cohen. I probably have more confidence in a Tarik Cohen than a David Montgomery this week because I expect the Bears to have to throw the ball to win this game. Obviously, Allen Robinson, Anthony Miller will both be great, but Tarik Cohen's probably the third target in this offense, certainly, and he has been for the last couple of years, even though he led the team in all their receiving stuff last year. Should be pretty decent. Moving on, we have number 34, Kerryon Johnson. If he's brought back this week and he's given the opportunity to play, outside of a lot of other running backs, I probably have more confidence in him because he is a talented running back. So we'll see where that stands. Again, he is eligible to return, may not return, might be sent to the IR or left on the IR for the rest of the season to kind of just mold and get ready for next season. Again, he's a very young running back, and there's no point in kind of rushing him back if they don't have to. They're not playing for anything, All right, let's talk about the last 2 running backs on today's episode as a tandem. Patrick Laird, Myles Gaskin. I kind of, talked about them earlier, and I wanted to mention them because they play against the Cincinnati Bengals. And the Cincinnati Bengals give up some of the most points to the running back position on a weekly basis. This is a team that absolutely, in my eyes, can potentially get destroyed on the ground. They give the 6th most points, and to be honest, in the last couple of weeks, they've been giving up 10-plus points to just about everybody. Like Michelle went for over 10. Burkhead went for over 10. White went for over 10. Chubb and Hunt both went for over 10. Benny Snell, Josh Jacobs, Mark Ingram almost went for over 10. Le'Veon Bell went for 8.7. Darrell Henderson went for 8. Gurley went for over 10. Leonard Fournette went for 15. Ingram went for 14. Chase Edmonds went for 16. David Johnson 17. Jalen Samuels 19. James Conner 22. They just give up 10 plus points to running backs. That's just what they do. And to be honest, if these two guys, as a potential flex play, go for over 10 apiece, I'm not going to be surprised. That's why I wanted to mention that, because they have the possibility of doing so. And because of the matchup and the potential, I expect them to at least have a decently good performance. And that's it. Thank you, everybody, for watching. I appreciate you guys spending your time today. I made an extra long episode because I know many of you are looking to kind of get the content in your direction. Some of you guys are working at a desk right now and just typing away and listening to the podcast. So I appreciate you guys taking your time out of your day. Hopefully this entertained you enough, gave you some valuable information for this coming week to help you kind of capture your fantasy championship here in week 16. Thank you again, everybody. And until next time, I'll probably have a quarterback video out later today because I got to wrap everything up early this week. Thank you, everybody, for watching. And until next time, I'll see you guys. Peace.